Welcome to TerrorMouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them.
Story 1. The Jesus Parade that walked backward. No one in Red Hollow could remember a Christmas Eve without the Jesus Parade. It was the one thing that survived everything else: the mill closures, the population decline, the houses left to rot at the edge of town. Every December 24th, no matter how empty Main Street became, the parade still happened. It gave people something to gather around, something to believe hadn't changed. That was the lie. I arrived in Red Hollow 2 days before Christmas, driving north from the city to document small-town holiday traditions. My channel specialized in Forgotten America, places clinging to rituals long after their original meaning had been lost. Red Hollow came recommended by an old forum post I barely remembered saving. The post ended with a single line: "If they ever walk backward again, leave." At the time, I assumed it was someone being poetic. The town itself looked harmless enough. Snow-dusted rooftops. A single diner. A church steeple rising like a finger pointing accusingly at the sky. But something felt wrong the moment I crossed the town line. My GPS froze, spinning endlessly before going blank. The radio cut out. Even my phone battery drained faster than it should have. At the motel, the clerk avoided eye contact when I mentioned the parade. "You filming this year?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That okay?" He hesitated too long. "Just don't stand too close," he finally said. On Christmas Eve, Main Street filled earlier than usual. Families stood bundled together, breath fogging the air. There were no vendors, no hot cocoa stands like I'd seen in other towns. Just people waiting, quiet, tense, like they were bracing for something rather than celebrating. St. Martha's Church loomed at the top of the hill, its doors shut tight. Normally, the parade began there. I set up my camera near a lamppost, expecting the bells to ring and the doors to open. They didn't. At exactly 6 p.m., the bells rang once. Then again. Then stopped completely. A murmur moved through the crowd. Someone laughed awkwardly. Another person checked their watch. That's when a child pointed down the opposite end of Main Street, toward the fog-heavy road leading to the old cemetery. "They're coming from there," he said. The cemetery hadn't been used since the 1950s. Most of the headstones were sunken, names eroded into nothing. The town didn't like to talk about it. Out of the fog, shapes began to form. At first, I thought they were statues. Then they moved. The parade emerged slowly, silently, figures drifting backward through the mist. Their feet slid instead of stepping. Their bodies faced away from town, shoulders hunched, arms stiff at their sides. The man at the front wore a long white robe streaked with something dark near the hem. He carried a cross over one shoulder, but not like someone bearing weight. It hung from him unnaturally, as if fused to his body. People around me whispered. "Why are they facing the wrong way? Is this some new thing? Who planned this?" No one answered. Then the singing began. Not cheerful. Not celebratory. Low. Measured. The Lord's Prayer, but spoken backward, syllables twisted and dragged like they hurt to say. My chest tightened as I realized every performer was speaking perfectly in sync, mouths opening and closing at the same time. I raised my camera. The closer they came, the more details broke through the fog, and none of them were right. Their faces were pale, almost gray. Eyes wide and unblinking. Some had frost forming along their eyelashes, but they didn't react to the cold at all. Their skin looked stretched, like it didn't fit properly over bone. There were no children in the parade. No angels. No wise men. Just adults. Too many adults. The woman dressed as Mary turned her head sharply, still moving backward, and locked eyes with me. Her pupils were dilated so wide there was barely any white left. Her lips parted. And she whispered my full name. Not loudly. Not angrily. Like she had always known it. My camera shook. I lowered it, heart hammering. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone in town. I hadn't signed a guest book. I hadn't told anyone why I was really there. People started stepping back, but the fog had thickened into a wall. Buildings faded away. The streetlights flickered, then dimmed, bathing everything in a sick yellow glow. The Jesus figure slowed. The singing stopped. For the first time, I noticed the sound beneath everything else, a faint scraping, like something dragging under the street. The man stumbled. The cross fell. It hit the pavement with a sound that made my stomach drop. Wet. Heavy. Not wood. Bone. Long bones, fused together, jagged and uneven, dark stains soaking deep into the porous surface. A smell followed, old iron, rot, something buried too long and disturbed too suddenly. Someone screamed. The parade stopped moving backward. Every head snapped forward at once. The sound was unmistakable, like dozens of necks cracking simultaneously. They began walking toward us. The Jesus figure lifted his head slowly, revealing a face that no longer looked human. His mouth was split at the corners, healed wrong. His eyes were deep-set shadows, like holes punched into his skull. He spoke softly. "You celebrate my birth," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally, "but you buried what followed." The ground trembled. Cracks spread across Main Street, thin at first, then widening. From beneath the pavement, shapes pressed upward, hands, faces, outlines of bodies trapped just below the surface. Unmarked graves. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The bells of St. Martha's began ringing again, wildly, violently, as if something was pulling the ropes from the other side. The Jesus figure stepped closer. "This parade," he said, "is not for remembrance. The ground beneath us split open. It is for confession." By the time the ground stopped shaking, half of Main Street had vanished beneath a web of black cracks. People were screaming now, real screaming, not the polite panic of a staged scare, but no one could run. The fog had thickened into something solid, pressing against our chests, swallowing sound the moment it left our mouths. I tried to move backward. My foot wouldn't lift. The pavement beneath my boots felt soft, almost breathing. When I looked down, I saw faint impressions forming around my soles, as if something beneath the street was pushing up, learning my shape. The Jesus figure raised one hand. Everyone froze. Not because we chose to. Because our bodies obeyed. "You have stood on us for generations," he said calmly. "You paved us over. You sang hymns on top of our mouths." Behind him, the parade participants began to change. Their backs hunched lower. Their skin pulled tighter, veins surfacing in dark, branching lines. Their eyes rolled upward, whites exposed, like corpses pulled from icy water. I recognized one of them. The motel clerk. His mouth hung open, jaw trembling as if he were fighting words clawing their way out. Tears streamed down his face, freezing as they fell. The Jesus figure turned slowly, surveying the crowd like a priest judging a confession. "Red Hollow was never meant to survive," he continued. "It was meant to disappear with us." Images flooded my mind without warning, sharp, invasive flashes that weren't memories, but something worse. Bodies carried at night. Church bells muffled with cloth. A fire behind St. Martha's, flames swallowing evidence while hymns were sung loudly enough to drown out the screams. Years ago, no exact year, just winter, something had gone wrong in Red Hollow. A sickness. Or starvation. Or maybe something they didn't have a name for yet. People began dying faster than the town could bury them. So they didn't. They hid them. Under roads. Beneath homes. Inside the foundations of the church itself. And when that wasn't enough, they made a promise. The parade wasn't a celebration. It was a contract. Every Christmas Eve, they would reenact the story of salvation while walking backward, symbolically undoing time, reversing death itself. In return, the town would be spared. No accidents. No unexplained disappearances. No deaths that couldn't be explained away. Until the dead decided they were tired of waiting. The Jesus figure stepped closer to the edge of the cracked street. His feet never quite touched the ground. "You remembered the birth," he said. "But you forgot the burial." The earth split open completely. Hands burst through the pavement, gray, skeletal, fingernails torn and black. Faces followed, mouths open in silent howls. They weren't ghosts. They were bodies that had never finished dying. People were dragged down screaming, swallowed by the street as if it were liquid. The fog thinned just enough for me to see the church doors burst open at the top of the hill. Something massive shifted inside. The bell tower cracked. St. Martha's collapsed inward, revealing a pit beneath the altar, stacked floor to ceiling with bones arranged carefully, deliberately, into the shape of a cross far larger than any man. The Jesus figure turned to face me again. "You came to record us," he said. I shook my head. I couldn't speak. "Good," he whispered. "Then you will remember." The fog surged. I fell. Not down, through. I woke up on the highway, miles from Red Hollow, my camera still clutched in my hands. Dawn light crept across the trees. My phone worked. My GPS worked. Red Hollow didn't exist. I drove back the next day. There was no town. No road. No church. Just a wide, empty field covered in frost. But when I reviewed my footage, there was one clip that hadn't corrupted. A still frame. The parade. All of them facing backward. And in the reflection of a shop window behind them, the entire crowd, including me, was already buried beneath the street. The video uploaded itself that night. I didn't hit publish. It already had views. And every Christmas Eve since, I receive messages from people I've never met. They all say the same thing. They've started walking backward in our town too. Story 2. The procession that never ended. No one in Ashford Falls could remember when the Jesus parade became mandatory. That was the strange part. The town had always celebrated Christmas loudly, lights on every porch, hymns echoing from open church doors, children dressed as angels trailing fake snow behind them. But sometime over the years, the celebration shifted. Subtly. Quietly. Like a memory edited after the fact. Now, every December 24th, the town gathered without question. They didn't talk about why. They just showed up. Ashford Falls sat an hour north of the city, tucked between wooded hills and a frozen river that never quite thawed. Outsiders called it quaint. Old-fashioned. But locals knew better. The town had a way of watching you. Of keeping count. If you missed the parade, people noticed. If you asked questions, they stopped answering. The narrator, who had returned after 12 years away, noticed it immediately. The banners strung across Main Street read "He walks with us still," printed in red so dark it looked almost brown. The letters were uneven, hand-painted, as if written by many different people who had all tried to copy the same phrase from memory. The church bells began ringing at exactly 6 p.m. Not joyful bells. Slow. Measured. Heavy. 1, pause, 2, pause. Each toll felt like a warning rather than a call. The parade formed without instruction. People stepped into line from their houses, from parked cars, from side streets, holding candles already lit. No lighters. No matches. The flames were simply there. At the front stood the figure of Jesus. Not a statue. A man. Barefoot in the snow. He wore a white robe that dragged along the frozen pavement, never tearing, never darkening with slush. His head was bowed, long hair hiding his face. A crown of thorns sat too perfectly on his brow, no blood, no wounds, just the suggestion of pain. Someone whispered, "He looks just like last year." Someone else replied, "He always does." The narrator felt something twist in their stomach. Because they remembered the parade from childhood. And Jesus had been different. Back then, it was symbolic. A role played by rotating volunteers. A performance. This wasn't a performance. The man lifted his head. The eyes were wrong. They were too calm. Not kind. Not angry. Just empty, like a room after everyone has left. The procession began moving forward, but the rhythm was off. Every step echoed half a second too late, like the sound was struggling to catch up with reality. Snow didn't crunch beneath their feet. It absorbed them. As they walked, the narrator noticed something else. No one blinked. Not once. The parade wound through streets that felt longer than they should have been. Familiar houses stretched into unfamiliar shapes, windows repeating, doors appearing where none existed. Christmas lights flickered in patterns that felt intentional, 3 short flashes, then one long SOS. The church came into view far too soon. Its doors were open. Inside, there was no light. The Jesus figure stopped at the threshold and turned to face the crowd. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You have remembered me," he said. The words vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. "And I have come to remember you." The candles went out all at once. Darkness swallowed the street. In that darkness, something moved. Breathing, slow, collective, not human enough to belong to the crowd alone. The narrator felt hands brushing past them, gripping their arms, their shoulders, pulling them forward as the church doors slammed shut behind the last person inside. The smell hit next. Old incense. Rot. Cold stone soaked with something metallic. The church interior was larger than it had ever been. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, beams disappearing into shadow. Pews were packed with figures already seated, far more than the town's population allowed. Some were wearing clothes from decades ago. Some were wearing burial shrouds. Some were nothing but outlines, as if sketched into the air with charcoal. The Jesus figure walked down the aisle. Each step left faint footprints, not of feet, but of hands. Grasping. Reaching. At the altar, he turned. "This town was built on devotion," he said. "But devotion curdles when it is afraid to end." Images flooded the narrator's mind. Old winters. Hard winters. Children buried beneath frozen ground. Silent prayers unanswered. A town begging not for salvation, but for survival. And something answering. Not God. Not the devil. Something that wore faith like a familiar face. "You asked me to stay," the figure said softly. "So I did." The walls began to bleed. Not red. Black. Thick, slow, seeping from the cracks between stones, dripping onto the floor where it moved on its own, creeping toward the congregation's feet. People tried to scream. No sound came out. The Jesus figure smiled for the first time. And the bells began ringing again, this time from inside the church. 1, pause, 2, pause. The narrator realized with sick clarity that the parade was not a celebration. It was a count. And this year, it was almost finished. The bells did not stop. They rang from everywhere at once, inside the walls, beneath the floor, behind the narrator's eyes. Each toll pressed heavier than the last, like an invisible weight stacking on the chest. Time felt stretched thin, pulled tight around the congregation frozen in the pews. The black liquid spreading across the church floor reached their shoes. It was cold. Not wet, hungry. Where it touched skin, memories surfaced uninvited. Birthdays forgotten. Names of the dead spoken for the last time. Prayers whispered into pillows at night and immediately regretted. The substance was not consuming bodies first. It was consuming remembering. People began to slump forward, eyes glazing, faces softening into expressions of relief. As the blackness climbed their legs, they stopped resisting. Some smiled. Some whispered, "Thank you." That was when the narrator understood. Ashford Falls didn't worship this thing. They fed it. Every year, the parade chose who would stay awake and who would be taken. Those consumed didn't die, not really. They were absorbed, folded into the town itself, their memories stripped and repurposed to keep the thing wearing the face of Jesus familiar. That was why he always looked the same. He was made of them. The narrator felt a sharp pain behind their eyes as a memory surfaced, one they hadn't thought about since childhood. A winter storm. The river flooding. Bodies pulled from ice too late. The town gathered in the church, freezing, desperate. And a voice answered. "I will remain if you remember me." The deal had never ended. It renewed itself every Christmas. The Jesus figure stepped down from the altar and walked through the aisles. Where he passed, people collapsed peacefully, their outlines thinning, dissolving into ash that drifted upward instead of falling. "You came back," he said, stopping in front of the narrator. Up close, his face shifted subtly, nose, eyes, jawline changing every few seconds. They recognized pieces of it. The baker. The schoolteacher. A childhood friend who drowned years ago. "You remember before the forgetting," the thing said. "That makes you loud." The narrator tried to step back. The church doors were gone. In their place stood a wall of carved wood panels depicting the parade, hundreds of figures marching endlessly, candles raised, faces hollow. Some of the faces were still moving. "You can leave," the figure continued gently. "But then someone else must stay awake." The bells rang again. The black substance surged forward, swallowing the last of the congregation. The church grew quieter, emptier, larger. The pews cracked and reshaped themselves, bending inward like ribs. The narrator screamed. Sound returned. That was the mistake. The thing recoiled, not in pain, but surprise. The blackness hesitated. Memory, the narrator realized, was its weakness. They spoke every name they could remember. Every story. Every detail Ashford Falls had tried to erase. The old diner menu. The cracked playground slide. The river that took children and gave nothing back. The church shook. The Jesus figure staggered. "You don't want rest," it said, voice warping. "You want pain." "I want truth," the narrator said. They ran. The walls peeled away like wet paper, revealing the town outside, only it wasn't Ashford Falls anymore. Buildings were hollow shells. Streets looped back into themselves. The parade marched endlessly in circles, figures faceless now, candles burning with black flames. At the town's edge stood the river. Frozen. Cracked. The narrator ran onto the ice as the bells reached a deafening crescendo. Behind them, the thing screamed, not in rage, but in loss. The ice shattered. Cold swallowed everything. Morning came. Ashford Falls was quiet. Too quiet. The banners were gone. The church stood empty, dust-filled, and used for decades. No footprints in the snow. No bells. No parade. Official records would later say the town had slowly emptied over the years. No disappearances. No deaths. Just forgetting. The narrator woke in a hospital miles away, found half frozen on the riverbank. Doctors said hypothermia caused hallucinations. Trauma filled the gaps. But every Christmas Eve, at exactly 6 p.m., church bells ring in towns nearby, towns with no churches. And somewhere on a frozen river, candles still drift downstream, waiting for the next place that remembers just enough to invite it back.
Story 3. The night the parade stopped breathing.
They say the Jesus Parade in St. Aldan. New York had never missed a year, not even during blizzards, blackouts, or the pandemic. Every Christmas Eve, at exactly 8 p.m., the parade began at the old rail yard and ended at St. Miriam's Church. Families lined the streets with thermoses and folding chairs. Children waved glow sticks shaped like halos. Choirs sang until their voices cracked from the cold. That year, the snow came early and heavy, the kind that swallowed sound. I remember thinking the town felt muffled, like it was holding its breath. I was home visiting my parents, killing time before midnight mass. My mother insisted we go watch the parade like we always did. My father didn't argue, but he kept glancing at the window, the way people do when they expect something bad to arrive late. At 7:58 p.m., the bells rang once. At 7:59, the streetlights flickered. At 8 o'clock, nothing happened. No music, no footsteps, no cheers. People shifted uncomfortably, laughing it off at first. Someone joked about a late start. Someone else complained about the cold. Then, from somewhere far down the street, a single bell rang against low, hollow. Wrong. The parade began without sound. They emerged from the darkness in perfect formation, robed figures carrying candles that didn't flicker in the wind. No drums, no hymns, just the soft crunch of boots on snow. At the front was the Jesus statue, larger than usual, mounted on a wooden platform carried by 6 men. All of them walked in step. All of them had their heads bowed, and none of them were breathing. I didn't notice it at first. I noticed the candles first, how the flames burned black at the core. Then I noticed the silence, then the way the carrier's shoulders didn't rise or fall. Their mouths were slightly open, lips pale, teeth showing. My mother squeezed my arm. "Why aren't they singing?" she whispered. As the parade passed, people leaned in to see better and then leaned back, faces tightening with confusion. A woman near us called out her brother's name, one of the carriers. He didn't look at her, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The Jesus statue passed directly in front of me. Up close, it was wrong. The wood grain looked like skin. The eyes, painted brown for as long as I could remember, were glossy and wet. And for a split second, I swear, the statue's chest expanded slightly, then went still again. A child screamed. The parade stopped. Every marcher froze in place at the same time, like someone had hit pause. Snow fell around them, settling on shoulders and hoods, but none of them reacted. Then, slowly, the heads lifted. Every single one of them looked straight at the crowd. Not scanning, not searching, staring. The Jesus statue turned its head. Wood cracked softly as it moved. Somewhere behind us, glass shattered. Someone ran. Someone else dropped to their knees and began praying out loud. My father grabbed my shoulder hard enough to hurt. "Don't move," he said through clenched teeth. "Don't draw attention." The statue's mouth opened. No sound came out at first. Then the candles went out all at once, in total darkness. A voice spoke, not loud, not angry, but layered, as if many mouths were speaking through one shape. "Remain," it said. People panicked. The moment the crowd surged backward, the marchers moved again, not walking, gliding. Their feet barely touched the ground as they advanced, arms lifting in unison. Wherever their shadows passed, the snow beneath them melted into slush, then into something darker. I saw a man trip and fall. One of the robed figures bent down and touched his chest. The man exhaled once, then never inhaled again. His body went slack, eyes still open, mouth frozen in surprise. The robed figure stood, and the man stood with a candle appearing in his hand as if it had always been there. He joined the parade. We ran. We didn't make it far before the church bells began ringing again, faster this time, overlapping, deafening. The sound followed us through alleys and across streets, vibrating in my teeth. People scattered, slamming doors, diving into cars, screaming names into the snow behind us. The parade continued forward, unstoppable, absorbing anyone too slow to escape. As we reached my parents' house, I looked back one last time. The Jesus statue was no longer on the platform. It was walking, bare feet on snow, head raised, eyes open, and it was smiling. We locked every door and turned off every light. That didn't help from inside my parents' house. The sounds of St. Alden dying reached us anyways. Screams cut short, footsteps pounding and then stopping. The church bells ringing until they cracked into a distorted metallic howl. The windows fogged from the cold, but through the glass I could still see candlelight moving down the street, steady and organized. The parade was still marching. My father pressed furniture against the front door while my mother knelt in the living room, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. I stood frozen at the window, heart hammering, watching silhouettes glide past the houses. They were closer now, and there were more of them. Neighbors I recognized had joined the line. Mr. Callahan from the hardware store, the mail carrier, the girl who used to babysit me. All of them held candles. All of them moved in perfect rhythm. None of them breathed. The Jesus figure walked at the center now. No longer wooden, no longer pretending. Its skin had the color of old parchment stretched too tight, veins visible beneath the surface like dark threads. Its eyes reflected candlelight, alive with awareness. It stopped directly in front of our house. Every marcher halted at once. The bells fell silent. Then came the knocking, not frantic, not violent. 3 slow knocks. My father shook his head violently at me, but my legs moved without my permission. Each step toward the door felt heavier, like wading through deep water. My chest burned. My ears rang. Another knock. A voice spoke from the other side, warm, familiar, layered with too many tones. Open, it said gently. You came to watch. The doorknob began to turn on its own. My mother screamed the moment the door cracked open. The cold poured in like a living thing. Candlelight flooded the hallway. The Jesus figure stood inches away, towering, eyes locked onto me with something that felt like hunger and disappointment. You ran, it said. But you remember. Images slammed into my head. Parades from years ago. Faces smiling. Candles raised. The same figure, smaller then, quieter. Each year, people watched, cheered, sang, believing it was harmless tradition, feeding it. We carried your prayers, the voice said. Your fear. Your devotion. Every year, you asked to be saved. Its hand lifted and pointed past me toward the living room, where my parents trembled. And tonight, it continued softly. We collect. The marchers surged forward, the house filled with them. Candles dripping wax onto the floor, their shadows bending the walls inward. One touched my father's chest. Another brushed my mother's shoulder. Their breathing stopped mid-scream. I don't know why I was spared. Maybe it was because I hadn't prayed in years. Maybe because doubt is poison to faith-shaped things. Maybe because something needs witnesses. The Jesus figure leaned down until its face was inches from mine. Next year, it whispered, "Stand closer." Then everything went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. Snow covered the street. No bodies, no blood, no candles. The town looked peaceful to peaceful. Emergency sirens never came. News vans never arrived. Officially, the parade had been cancelled due to weather. Officially, nothing happened. But St. Aldan changed. Dozens of residents were simply gone. Their houses stood empty, food still on tables, cars in driveways. The church locked its doors permanently. The Jesus statue was never found. And every Christmas Eve since, at exactly 8 p.m., the bells ring once. Just once. People who hear it say the air feels thin afterward, like something nearby is breathing for them. Final time, then waiting, because the parade never truly ended. It just learned how to walk without being seen. And next year, it will need more people to carry it.
Story 4. The figure they would not let fall. The town of Bellows.
Creek believed that if the Jesus figure ever fell during the Christmas parade, the town would die with it. That belief wasn't written anywhere. It wasn't preached from the pulpit or explained to newcomers. It was simply understood, like gravity or the cold. You didn't test it. You didn't joke about it. And you never, under any circumstances, allowed the figure to touch the ground. Bellows Creek was small, even by New York standards. One main road, one church, a closed-down rail station that no trains had stopped at in decades. Every December, snow covered the town so evenly it looked staged, like a photograph that never changed. The Jesus Parade was the only event anyone cared about. They didn't call it a parade officially. They called it the carrying dot each year. A wooden statue of Jesus, life-sized, heavy, carved from dark oak quartz, lifted onto the shoulders of 6 chosen townsmen and carried through the streets on Christmas Eve. No wheels, no platform, just hands, shoulders, and quiet determination. The statue was old, too old. No one knew who carved it. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was heavier every year. I was invited because I was dating someone from Bellows Creek. Her name was Nora. She had moved to the city years ago and avoided coming back except for Christmas. When I asked why, she shrugged and said, "It's easier not to remember." I thought she meant family. I was wrong. We arrived 2 days before Christmas. The town greeted us politely, but without warmth. People stared just a little too long. Conversations stopped when we walked past, that first night. I noticed the statue. It stood inside the church, visible through the open doors, illuminated by candlelight. Jesus' head was tilted downward, eyes half-lidded. Mouth slightly open, not in agony, but in exhaustion. I stepped closer. The wood grain looked wrong. Too organic. The knots resembled healed wounds. When I leaned in, I swore I could smell something beneath the polish. Something like old sweat and damp earth. "Don't touch it," Nora said sharply. I pulled my hand back. "It's just a statue." She didn't answer. The night before the parade, the town held no rehearsal, no prayers, no preparation that I could see. Instead, people stayed inside. Lights went out early. The streets were empty by 9. I woke at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of wood scraping stone. I thought it was a dream until I realized Nora was awake too, sitting up in bed, staring at the door. "They're checking the weight," she whispered. "Who is?" She shook her head, eyes wet. "You're not supposed to see it before it's lifted." The sound continued for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. On Christmas Eve, the town gathered in silence. The 6 carriers stood before the church doors, shoulders wrapped in cloth, faces pale. None of them made eye contact with each other. Their hands shook slightly as they took their positions. When the statue was lifted, several people gasped. It sagged, not visibly, not enough for an outsider to notice, but the carriers reacted instantly, muscles straining, knees buckling slightly. One of them whispered, "It's heavier." Another whispered back, "It always is." The procession began. No music, no singing, just footsteps in snow and labored breathing. I walked alongside Nora, filming discreetly, though no one had told me not to. The statue's head bobbed with each step. At first, I thought it was the motion. Then I realized it was adjusting. As the parade moved through the streets, I noticed something disturbing. The carriers changed. Their breathing grew uneven. Their faces slackened, eyes glassy. One man began murmuring words under his breath, words that sounded like apologies. Halfway through the route, one carrier stumbled. The statue tilted. The entire crowd inhaled sharply. Dozens of hands shot out, steadying it before it could fall. The carriers froze, trembling under the weight. For a moment, everything was still. Then the statue's mouth opened, just slightly. A wet sound came from inside the wood. "Not yet," it whispered. The carrier who had stumbled began to cry. The parade resumed. But now everyone walked faster. Nora grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "If it falls," she said, "no one here will wake up again." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say that was impossible. But as we turned down the final street, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The snow beneath the statue was darker, not with dirt, with something soaking through from above. And the Jesus figure was smiling. By the time the parade reached the church again, the carriers were no longer walking. They were being dragged forward by the weight. Their feet slid across the snow, leaving crooked trails behind them. One man's nose bled freely, dark drops staining his beard. Another had lost feeling in his arms. His hands were locked in place, fingers curved, like claws around the wooden frame beneath the statue. No one helped, no one could. The rule was unspoken but absolute. Only the chosen 6 may carry him. The church doors loomed ahead, wide open, candlelight flickering like a warning. The bells did not ring. They never rang at the end. Bellows Creek believed bells were for the living. As they crossed the threshold, the temperature changed. The cold vanished, replaced by a suffocating warmth that smelled of rot and incense. The crowd stopped at the doorway. Only the carriers and the statue went inside. Nora pulled free from my grip. "I have to go in," she said. "They won't let you," I replied. "They don't stop blood," she whispered. Already stepping forward, no one blocked her inside. The carriers collapsed to their knees in front of the altar, gasping. The statue remained upright, supported by their shoulders, its head now fully raised. I followed Nora in despite, every instinct screaming not to. The church interior was wrong. The walls were darker than they should have been. The wood warped as if swollen from years of moisture. The air hummed faintly, like something breathing behind the walls. I noticed deep grooves carved into the stone floor, repeated marks that ran from the altar toward the doors. Drag marks. Nora knelt beside one of the careers, a man in his 40s. Eyes sunken, lips trembling. "It's taking more than it should," he see. ROAKED. Nora turned to the statue. Her voice broke. "Please. Not this year," the statue responded. The wood cracked slowly, deliberately like joints, popping after a long sleep. A seam split along the chest, not violently, but carefully, as if it had always been designed to open. Inside was not wood. Inside were layers. Old cloth. Yellowed flesh. Something darker beneath that pulsed faintly, wet and alive. I stumbled backward and hit a pew. This can't be, ISTAMMERED. Nora didn't look away. "It's never been a statue," she finally told me. Bellows Creek was founded on a massacre, one erased from records, buried under churches and rewritten land deeds. The town had killed a wandering preacher one winter when food ran out. Not because he claimed to be holy, but because he wouldn't die. They starved him, beat him, left him outside. He kept breathing, so they carved him. They hollowed him while he lived, shaping him into an object of worship, locking his body inside oak and prayer, believing stillness would stop him. It didn't each year. The carrying was not a celebration. It was a transfer. The figure fed on the strength, the years, the lives of those who bore him, slowly replacing what remained of his own ruined body. That was why he grew heavier. That was why no one was allowed to let him fall. Because if he touched the ground, he would no longer need carriers. The statue's head turned toward me. His eyes opened fully for the first time. They were human, someone new, he said. Voice layered many throats speaking at once. One of the carriers screamed as his shoulder collapsed inward, bone folding like wet cardboard. His body slumped, but the statue did not fall. Nora stood. "I'll take his place." She said. The church erupted in shouting. She left. "She's not chosen." She ran from him. The statue smiled wider. She remembers, before anyone could stop her. Nora stepped beneath the frame and lifted the wood, sank into her shoulders, like teeth. She cried out, but did not let go. The fallen carrier went still, dead. The statue exhaled. Satisfied, I rushed forward. "Nora, stop please." She looked at me one last time. "I didn't leave because I forgot," she said. "I left because I was next." Her knees locked. The remaining carriers screamed as the weight shifted again, heavier now. Greedier, I did the only thing no one ever dared. I shelved hard. The statue tipped. The scream that came from it was not human. It was ancient and furious, echoing through wood and bone alike. As the figure fell, the floor cracked open beneath its stone, splitting, earth yawning wide. The statue hit the ground. The sound was like a tree snapping in a storm. The church went silent. Then everything screamed. The walls bled dark resin. The floor collapsed inward, swallowing the altar, the statue, the carriers, Nora included, into a pit that smelled like centuries of decay. I was thrown backward as the roof caved in. When I woke, it was morning. Bellows Creek was gone. No ruins. No church. No road, just a flat, snow-covered field stretching endlessly in all directions. My phone had no signal. My footage was gone. Maps showed nothing, but every Christmas Eve, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I wake to the sound of wood scraping stone. and somewhere beneath the ground, something is trying to stand back up. Story 5 *, the bells that learned our names. No one remembers when the bells were first hung in the town of Rookridge. Old photographs show them already. There 3 iron bells suspended from a wooden frame on the hill above town. Black with age, their surfaces carved with names that no one could read anymore. The town elders used to say the bells were older than the church, older than the graves, older than Rookridge itself. They were never rung for celebration, only for warning. Only when something had gone wrong. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., the bells rang once, not 3 times, not a peal, just a single, deep, vibrating note that traveled through walls and bone alike. It wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. People would wake up with the sound still inside their skulls, their teeth humming, their hearts racing as if they'd been called by name in a dream. For years, nothing else happened. The bell rang. People woke. Life continued. Rookridge learned to live with it, until the bells started answering back. It began with Thomas Hale, the night shift gas station clerk. He told his wife that the bells sounded different one night closer, somehow heavier. The next morning, he swore he could still hear it, faintly, beneath every other sound, like a second heartbeat that wasn't his. By evening, he was irritable, snapping at customers, pressing his palms to his ears as if trying to hold something in. At 2:17 a.m., the bell rang again, and a second sound followed it. A whisper. Thomas woke up screaming, convinced someone had leaned over his bed and spoken his name. He ran outside barefoot, frost biting into his skin, searching the darkness for the source. From the hill, the bells hung perfectly still. No wind, no movement, but etched into the iron of the center bell. Beneath layers of rust, a fresh name gleamed wetly in the moonlight. Thomas Hale. By morning, Thomas was dead. No wounds, no struggle. Just found sitting upright in his kitchen chair, eyes open, mouth stretched into a silent O, as if listening to something only he could hear. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, though no one could explain the blood that had trickled from his ears. The town tried to dismiss it as coincidence. They always did. Then the bells rang twice the next night. After that, things escalated quickly. People began hearing the bells at other hours, soft, distant tolls that only one person at a time seemed to notice. Children woke crying, saying the bells were calling them outside. Dogs refused to go near the hill, whining and pulling against their leashes. Radios crackled with low metallic groans at 2:17, as if the bells were vibrating through the airwaves. Themselves, names started appearing on the bells more frequently, not carved, not scratched, pressed into the iron from the inside, as though something beneath the metal was pushing outward, shaping letters with unseen fingers. Each name belonged to someone who died within days, sometimes hours. The town council met in secret and finally admitted what they'd been hiding. Decades ago, when Rookridge was founded, the land had been claimed after a mass grave was discovered on the hill, hundreds of bodies buried without markers. Their cause of death unknown. The founders believed the bells would keep them quiet, that the sound would hold something down, contain it, teach it the shape of silence. They never considered that it might be listening. The bells had learned the town's rhythm, learned how long people lived, learned how grief sounded, learned names by the time the bells rang 3 times. Rookridge was unraveling. The third bell never rang at 2:17. It rang at 2:16. People felt it before they heard. It a pressure in the chest. A sudden certainty that something had shifted. Windows shattered across town. The sound didn't fade. It lingered, vibrating through the ground, through the graves, through the marrow of the living. And then the whispers began everywhere at once. Not loud, not frantic, patient. Voices murmured names from inside walls, from beneath floors, from the backs of mirrors. Families heard their own surnames, spoken slowly, lovingly, like a promise. Some residents fled in their cars, only to find the roads looping back into town no matter which direction they drove. Others locked themselves inside, stuffing cloth into their ears, praying it would stop. It didn't. At dawn, the bells fell silent. Rookridge was empty, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just abandoned houses with doors left open, meals left half-eaten, beds still warm. On the hill, the bells were gone. In their place was a vast, open pit, descending into darkness so deep it swallowed light. The walls of the pit were smooth, metallic, etched with thousands of names layered over one another until they became unreadable, new. Names were still forming. Weeks later, hikers reported hearing a single bell ring while passing through the area where Rookridge once stood. There was no town, no hill, just forest. But if you stand very still at night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., you might hear it too. And if you listen closely, beneath the bell's low iron hum, you may hear a whisper learning how to say your name. The disappearance of Rookridge should have made headlines. It didn't. Maps were quietly updated. Road signs were removed overnight. Official records listed the town as decommissioned due to unsafe land conditions. People who claimed to have lived there were told they were mistaken, redirected, corrected, and eventually ignored. It was as if the world itself had agreed to forget Rookridge ever existed. But forgetting didn't stop the bells. They rang in places where there were no towers. The first report came from a truck driver passing through a rural highway nearly 50 miles from where Rookridge had been. At exactly 2:17 a.m., his radio cut to static and he heard a single, deep torso close. It made his dashboard vibrate. He pulled over, convinced there must be a church nearby. There was nothing, no buildings, no lights, just trees and fog. When he returned home 2 days later, his wife noticed something etched into the metal door of his truck. Just beneath the handle, his name. He was dead by the end of the week. That was when people started connecting the stories. Former residents of nearby towns began sharing the same experiences. The bell sound never loud, never distant, always perfectly timed, always followed by whispers, always followed by death or disappearance. Investigators found no pattern except one chilling constant. Every victim had, at some point in their life, passed through Rookridge, some only once, some decades ago. The bells had not been bound to a place, they had been bound to people. A paranormal research group finally took interest after a series of recordings surfaced online. At 2:17 a.m., microphones picked up a low-frequency resonance, not audible to human ears, something closer to a vibration than a sound. When the audio was slowed down, layered beneath the hum was speech, names, thousands of them. The researchers tracked the signal's origin and arrived at the former site of Rookridge. The pit was gone. The ground looked undisturbed, forest reclaiming the land as if nothing had ever been there. But their equipment went haywire the moment they stepped onto the soil. Compasses spun, batteries drained instantly, and beneath their feet they felt it a subtle, rhythmic pulse, like a buried heart still beating. At 2:17 a.m., the ground rang. Not above them, below, the earth itself vibrated, and one of the researchers collapsed, screaming. He clawed at his ears, begging them to make it stop, shouting that the bells were inside him now. They were counting, measuring, learning how much space he took up. By morning, his name was carved into his own ribcage, pressed outward beneath the skin as if written from the inside. The group fled and never returned. Over time, the pattern became clear. The bells were no longer warning the town, they were expanding it. Every name learned became a doorway. Every memory became a brick. The bells were building something vast, an invisible and unseen Rookridge made of people instead of streets. Those claimed by the sound didn't die immediately. Many continued living for days, weeks, even months, hearing faint tolls only they could perceive. Until one night, they would stand up abruptly at 2:17 a.m. and walk away. Neighbors described them leaving calmly, eyes glassy, lips moving silently, as if answering a call. They were never seen again. Satellite imagery later revealed something impossible, subtle distortions spreading across the region, like fingerprints pressed into reality itself. Places where sound behaved strangely, where silence felt heavy, where people felt watched even when alone. New bells began appearing, not iron ones, living ones. Hospitals reported patients whose chest cavities resonated like hollow metal. Churches complained of bells ringing when none were installed. In one case, a man opened his mouth to speak and produced a single, perfect toll before collapsing dead. The bells no longer needed structures. They had learned anatomy today. There are support groups for listeners, people who hear the bell but haven't been named yet. They don't sleep. They don't travel. They don't speak their names aloud, believing it might help the bells learn faster. Some wear ear protection constantly, though it never helps. The sound doesn't travel through air. It travels through memory, through recognition, through attention, because the bells don't hunt. Randomly, they only ring for those who hear them, and once you've heard your first toll, the bells already know where you are. They are patient. They always ring again at 2:17 a.m. And someday, maybe tonight, they will ring for you.
Story 6. The parade that remembered you. No one in red.
Hollow could remember when the Jesus parade began. That alone should have been a warning. The town sat north of the river, past abandoned rail lines and forests that never fully lost their leaves. It was small enough that everyone knew everyone, but large enough the secrets could survive if the town wanted them to. And Red Hollow wanted many things forgotten. Every December, without fail, the parade happened. No flyers, no announcements, no planning meetings. People simply knew on the second Sunday before Christmas. They woke with the same quiet understanding, like a thought placed gently behind the eyes. Today is the parade. Children dressed themselves in robes they swore hadn't been in their closets the night before. Elderly men polished wooden crosses they didn't remember owning. Women braided wreaths of pine and wire, their fingers moving automatically, muscle memory older than their lives. When asked who organized it, the answers were always the same. It's just what we do. It's always been like this. Why are you asking questions like that? The parade route never changed. It began at the old mill road, past the church, wound through the main square, and ended at the riverbank where the bridge once stood before, collapsing decades ago. No one crossed the river. No one ever tried. The role of Jesus was chosen every year. No voting, no volunteering. The man simply woke up, knowing it was him. This year, that man was Caleb Morris. Caleb had lived in Red Hollow his entire life. 36 years. Divorced, no children. He worked maintenance at the school and drank alone most nights. He wasn't religious. He hadn't been to church since his mother's funeral. When he woke that morning, his palms hurt. There were marks on them, not wounds. Just deep red impressions, circular, as if something had pressed there for hours. On his chair lay a robe of white linen and a crown of braided thorns, real thorns, still green, sap sticky against the fabric. Caleb didn't scream. That disturbed him more than anything else. He felt calm, heavy, as if his body had already decided something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. By noon, the streets were filling. No music played, yet everyone marched in rhythm. Candles burned without wind flicker. Children sang hymns they'd never been taught, in voices too low for their age. And when Caleb stepped outside, the town fell silent. Every head turned, not in reverence, in recognition. Someone whispered, "He looks right this year." The parade began at dusk. As Caleb walked, the robe grew heavier. The crown pressed deeper into his scalp. He felt warmth trickle down his neck, soaking into the linen. The pain was distant, like it belonged to someone else. He tried to stop. His legs kept moving as they passed the church. The bells rang once, only once. Caleb felt something shift inside him then, like a memory opening that wasn't his. He saw Red Hollow long ago. Starving winters, sick children, the river flooding and taking half the town with it. People praying not for salvation, but for relief. They hadn't asked for heaven. They had asked for someone to remember their suffering so they wouldn't have to. The parade reached the riverbank. The crowd stopped. This was where it always ended, except this year. The river was lower, exposed. Stones formed a rough path across the water. Someone in the crowd gasped. Someone else began to cry. Caleb heard a voice behind his thoughts. "You can stop walking if you want." His feet stepped forward. The water didn't touch him as he crossed. The air thickened. The world dulled. Sounds stretched like melting tape. He felt the weight of thousands of memories settle into his chest. Prayers, regrets, deaths, dreams never lived. When he reached the far bank, he turned. The crowd stared back at him with faces full of terror and relief. The voice returned. "They gave us their pain. Now we give them peace." Caleb opened his mouth. The scream that came out wasn't human in Red Hollow. Every person collapsed at once. Some died instantly, faces frozen in calm smiles. Others fell into sleep so deep their bodies forgot how to wake. The river began to rise again, swallowing the stone path. Caleb stood alone, the crown fused to his skull. The robe became his skin, and somewhere beyond the trees, another town stirred its people, waking with the same quiet understanding. Today is the parade. Caleb did not die. That was the first lie the world told itself. When dawn came, Red Hollow was empty. Cars sat half parked along the streets. Front doors stood open. Coffee cups cooled on kitchen tables. Radios hummed softly to static. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just the heavy sense that something essential had been removed and taken elsewhere. Authorities arrived within days. They searched houses, forests, the riverbanks. Divers went down where the bridge had collapsed years ago. Dogs lost the trail at the water's edge and refused to go further, whining and pulling back as if the scent burned them. No one found Caleb, Morris, but he was still there. He stood beyond the river, where Red Hollow used to believe nothing existed. The forest on that side was wrong trees, bending inward, bark split with pale seams that pulsed slowly, like breathing skin. The sky never fully brightened there. It stayed the color of old bone. Caleb no longer felt pain. The crown was part of him now, not embedded. Thorns threaded through his skull and spine, blooming outward like roots. The robe was not clothed anymore. It moved when he breathed. It tightened when he tried to remember his own name. Memory was the first thing to go. Not all at once, piece by piece. His mother's face dissolved into a blur. The sound of his own voice became unfamiliar. Words felt unnecessary. He no longer needed them. The voice remained. It did not speak often when it did. It never commanded. It reminded. They wanted peace. They wanted rest. They wanted to be forgotten. Caleb began to walk, wherever he stepped. The ground remembered him. Grass yellowed in the shape of his footprints. Trees leaned toward him, branches creaking like joints long unused. Animals froze when they saw him, not in fear, but recognition. Birds fell silent. Insects burrowed into the soil and stayed there, miles away. People began to dream. Not of Red Hollow, of a man walking toward them in a town 3 counties south. A woman woke screaming with her palms bleeding, circular marks pressed deep into the skin. She had never heard of Red Hollow, had never seen a Jesus parade, but she knew, with complete certainty, that she had been chosen. Churches started noticing patterns, parades without permits, processions that appeared overnight, congregations that swelled with people who could not explain why they came, only that they felt lighter. Afterward, each parade ended near water. Each parade left. Fewer people behind, no deaths were reported, just disappearances, and those who remained spoke differently afterward, slower, softer, as if speaking cost something now. Caleb watched it spread, not with pride, not with guilt, with inevitability. He understood now what he had become. He was not Jesus. He was the vessel. Pain collected in him, grief compressed, human suffering distilled into something manageable, something useful. Towns fed him what they could no longer carry, and in return he left them hollow but calm. Empty towns did not riot. Empty towns did not resist. Empty towns did not remember. The voice grew, stronger with each parade. Are doing well. They sleep better because of you. This is mercy. One night, Caleb felt something new. Resistance. A child stood at the edge of a parade route in a town that did not yet know what it was becoming. She was no more than 8, holding a paper angel with torn wings. She stared directly at Caleb as he passed, and she did not bow. Her eyes filled with tears, not fear, but fury. You're stealing them, she said. The crowd froze. The voice went silent. Caleb stopped walking. The girl stepped closer. My mum doesn't cry anymore. My dad doesn't laugh. They're still here, but they're gone. Caleb felt something twist inside his chest, a crack. Memory rushed in his mother's funeral. The weight in his chest, the pain he used to drink away because it proved he was still alive. The thorns tightened. The voice returned. Sharp now. She doesn't understand. Pain is a burden. You were chosen to carry it. Caleb looked down at the child. For the first time since Red Hollow, he spoke with his own voice. I didn't agree to this. The ground trembled. The parade screamed not aloud, but in unison. A psychic wail of people realizing too late what they were losing. The voice hissed. You agreed the moment you walked. Caleb stepped off the route. The world convulsed. People collapsed, clutching their chests as years of suppressed grief flooded back into them. Some screamed. Some vomited. Some laughed hysterically. A few died not from pain, but from remembering too much at once. Caleb felt it. Every emotion slammed into him like a tidal wave. He fell to his knees. The crown cracked. Sap and blood poured down his face. The forest beyond the town recoiled. The voice screamed not in anger, but fear. If you break, they wake. Caleb smiled through shattered teeth. Good. He tore the crown free. The scream that followed did not belong to him. Across the country, parades collapsed. Processions dissolved into chaos. Towns woke screaming from decades-long numbness. Grief returned. So did rage. So did hope. Red Hollow reappeared on maps as a ruin. They never found Caleb's body, but sometimes, when a town grows too quiet, when grief piles up instead of being shared, when people pray not to heal, but to forget, a man is seen walking near the edge of the road, bleeding palms, bare head, watching, carefully not to take pain, but to make sure no one ever gives it away again. Because the most terrifying thing a town can lose is the ability to suffer together.
Story 7. The Last Procession of St. Calder.
Every December, the town of St. Calder, New York, held a Jesus parade that no one advertised anymore. There were no flyers, no social media posts, no church announcements outside the town limits. And yet, every Christmas Eve, the streets filled anyway because, in St. Calder, participation was not optional. The parade began after sunset, when the snow reflected the street lights and the town looked almost holy. Residents gathered in silence, dressed in long white robes cinched with red rope, their faces hidden behind plain wooden masks carved with no expression at all. Each mask had the same hollow eyes. The same narrow mouth. At the front of the procession stood the cross. It was not decorative. It was old, heavy, and stained so dark it looked burned into itself. The men who carried it switched every few minutes, their shoulders bleeding through the fabric of their robes. No one complained. No one ever did. I came to St. Calder by accident. I was driving north on Christmas Eve, trying to beat a storm, when my GPS rerouted me through a road that shouldn't have existed. The snow grew thicker. The trees closed in. My signal died. And then, suddenly, the road opened into a town square glowing with candlelight. Cars were parked neatly along the street. Engines cold, doors unlocked. People stood motionless at the sidewalks, watching the procession move past them. I pulled over. That was my first mistake. A woman approached my car before I could lock the doors. She wore the white robe, the red rope, the wooden mask. Snow dusted her shoulders like ash. "You're early," she said calmly. "I'm not staying." I replied. I'm just lost. She tilted her head. No one is lost on Christmas Eve, she said. Only chosen. Before I could respond, church bells began to ring. Not joyful bells, began slow, like a heartbeat counting down. The procession began to move, the crowd parted. And I saw him, the Jesus figure. He walked barefoot through the snow, dragging a smaller cross behind him, leaving a dark trail where his feet touched the ground. His crown of thorns was real thick, fresh, biting into his scalp. Blood ran freely down his face, soaking into his beard. What terrified me wasn't the blood, it was that his eyes were open, and he was looking directly at me. He did not blink as he passed. He whispered without turning his head, "You're late." Hands closed around my arms, firm, numerous, guiding, not forcing, because force was unnecessary. The crowd swallowed me, dressing me in a robe I hadn't seen seconds earlier. The fabric was warm, damp, already worn by someone else. They placed a mask over my face. Inside, it smelled of wood and iron. The procession moved through the streets of St. Calder, past houses with dark windows, past families standing silently on their porches, heads bowed as the cross passed them. Some were crying, others looked relieved. I tried to pull away. The man beside me whispered, "Don't resist. He feels that." The Jesus figure stopped. Every bell fell silent. He turned slowly. Up close, I saw the truth. His skin was stretched too tight. His mouth trembled like it was holding back a scream. His eyes were bloodshot, frantic, begging, yet his lips smiled gently. Rehearsed, he raised his voice. "For the sins of St. Calder," he said, "I walk again." The crowd responded in unison, "Amen." The church loomed ahead. Its doors were open inside. The walls were lined with names. Hundreds of names carved deep into the wood. Dates followed each one, always ending on December 24th. The Jesus figure was led to the altar. He stumbled. No. One helped him. The priest, if that's what he was, stepped forward, holding a ledger bound in cracked leather. He opened it and read aloud. "Last year's offering fulfilled its purpose," he said. "The town endured. The children lived. The sickness passed us by." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Then his eyes landed on the page beneath. "This year," he continued, "we require one more." Every head turned toward me. The Jesus figure met my eyes again. This time, his expression broke. I was promised release. He whispered. The priest ignored him. "Step forward," he commanded. My feet moved without permission. The crowd parted, reverent, expectant. The priest removed my mask. Cold air hit my face. "You will walk," he said, "and when you fall, you will be remembered." I screamed as the crown of thorns was lifted from the Jesus figure's head. It was placed on mine, and the bells began to ring again. They led me back outside before I could scream again. The crown pressed deeper into my skull with every step. Thorns scraping bone, warm blood slipping down my temples and freezing against my skin. The robe dragged heavy around my legs, soaked with something older than snow. I realized with a sick clarity that it wasn't sized for me because it had never been meant to be reused. The previous Jesus figure collapsed onto the church floor behind me. No one looked back. The bells guided us through the town again. But now the streets felt narrower, the buildings closer, as if St. Calder itself were leaning in to watch. Windows that had been dark earlier were now faintly lit. Faces pressed behind the glass, children, elderly, entire families watching with hollow reverence. Not pity, relief. A man walking beside me whispered through his mask, voice shaking, "Don't stumble too soon. It angers him when the walk is short." Him. I croaked. The ground beneath my bare feet felt wrong to warm beneath the snow, as if something alive pulsed underneath the pavement. I noticed cracks in the road I hadn't seen before, thin, branching lines that looked disturbingly like veins. We reached the edge of town. That's when I saw what St. Calder had been hiding. The trees beyond the last streetlight were not trees, they were crosses. Hundreds of them, some rotted, some fresh, some still dark with stains that never washed away. And nailed too many of them were remains, bones picked clean, scraps of fabric fluttering in the wind. Wooden masks split in half, as if torn away. Mid-scream, the crowd knelt. Every single person. The priest raised his hands. St. Calder was dying, he proclaimed. Plagues, fires, vanishing children, crops turning black in the ground. My knees buckled, but hands held me upright. We prayed, he continued, and something answered. The ground trembled beneath us. From the forest, a sound rose low, vast, wet. Not a roar, not a voice. More like breathing, something ancient inhaling through roots and soil and bone. We were told the story was wrong, the priest said, that the sacrifice was never meant to end. The earth split open, not violently, patiently, like a mouth opening. Below us was a pit lined with roots twisted into the shape of ribs. Inside, something moved. I could not see its full form, only the suggestion of mass and depth. Eyes opening where no eyes should exist. You wear his crown, the priest said to me. You walk his path, and when you fall, he feeds. I tried to fight. I tried to scream. The thing below responded. A sound surged upward that rattled my teeth. A chorus of voices layered atop one another, men, women, children, all screaming in perfect unison. The previous Jesus figure was dragged forward beside me. He was barely alive. They lied, he sobbed. They said 1 year was enough. The priest placed a hand on his shoulder, and it was, he said calmly. For last year, the man was thrown into the pit, the thing below, convulsed. The ground shuddered, the sound stopped, silence returned, like a held breath, finally released. Priest turned to me. You understand now, he said. St. Calder doesn't celebrate salvation. He smiled beneath his hood. We celebrate postponement. They cut the ropes binding my arms. For a moment, I thought they were letting me go. Instead, they stepped back. The bells rang once. The ground beneath my feet softened. I sank to my knees. The pit pulsed, roots wrapped around my legs, my waist, my chest. They were warm, alive, pulling. The crown of thorns tightened, digging deeper, anchoring me in place as I was dragged downward. I saw something that finally broke me. The faces in the crowd, not strangers. Anymore, I recognized them. Drivers I'd passed on the road. People whose cars sat abandoned at the edge of town. Outsiders, previous offerings, wearing new masks, waiting as darkness swallowed me. The priest's voice echoed above. Next year, he announced, St. Calder will endure. The ground closed, the bells stopped, and somewhere far above, A new traveler's GPS rerouted. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. TerrorMouth.